Yeah, good deal. So, so for several, I don't know how many, but several Saturdays, I rode that bike, and I had the time of my life on that thing. And he'd lose the marbles again. And so the next week I'd have to give him more. I was his source of supply, and consequently I got to ride his bike. But anyhow, I remember one Saturday I was on that bike, and I'm heading, the road splits, and the left-hand one goes down a hill, and the other one went straight ahead. Well, here comes the girl, one I was very fond of in school, that was walking along there the street, and here I am with my bicycle. And I say, boy, I got to show off. See, so I take my hands off the wheels, you know, and I must have hit a rock or something. But anyhow, the next thing you know, I'm sprawled all over the street in front of her, and so is the bicycle. And anyhow, I get that back over to school to Hanson, and I say, look what I did. Oh my, I don't know what my parents are going to say. Well, we found out what the parents said. Don't lend that kid that bicycle anymore. So that was the end of that, Ray. But
so you never quite impressed the girl, huh?
no, I don't think so. No, I did just the opposite. I impressed her, but in the wrong way. But I finally got a bike of my own. I never could save enough money to get it. But my Uncle Ed, who realized my plight, he said, well, he says, I don't know whether he said, I'll give you $6 or whether the bike that I found cost $6. But there was a limitation on how much money that he could give me to get it. But I found a bike for $6 in a bicycle shop downtown. I was getting ripped off. I know now, but I didn't at the time. This is my bicycle. You know, it had a bad tire on it, and no fenders, and no bell, no extra stuff. All it had was a frame, the handlebars, and two wheels, and the sprocket. That was it. And looked bad. With a bad deal. But $6. So I paid it. And he pumped the tires up for me, and I took off, and I go about 8 blocks, and all of a sudden I find out this one tire's gotten flat. And so I had to find a filling station where they had free air, you know, for the automobile tires. And I'd fill it up again. I'd go about 8 more blocks and was out of air again. And so I got, by the time I get home, it's out of air again. And my mother's a little disappointed, but with it. But I wasn't. I said, gee, I got a bike, you know. And Forrest Reed, my next door neighbor, had just a year or so before that, his dad had got him a new Deluxe. Deluxe was the name of the bike, a beautiful thing with beautiful handlebars, and a place in the back where you could put stuff, you know, a little rack, and a horn or a bell that you ring, and all those goodies. And
would they paint them different colors?
Oh yeah, they were all painted. Those Deluxe were pretty good bikes. They really looked nice. And so anyhow, that one of mine was a mess. But anyhow, Bud had, among other things, he had a kit for fixing the tires, you know. So he fixed my tire for me, and I got over that problem. And it served its purpose, all right. I had a lot of fun. I could ride where anybody else rode, you know, and so forth. So that was my first bike.
Did were the schools in? Well, you mentioned you moved to different neighborhoods. Were the schools always within walking distance of where the kids lived?
Yeah.
And so were they always pretty small schools?
Well, small schools. They were 2-story schools as a rule, and some had basements. Yeah, Buchanan School was 2 stories plus basement. And I don't know what else they had down in the basement except that they had the boys' latrine down there. And probably the girls were too, I don't know. But I don't know what you mean by small or large.
Well, I'm just saying, I mean, nowadays they have these huge schools that serve 1,000 kids.
No.
And they bus them in from all
Yeah,
over.
no, we didn't bus them in. We walked. We walked, and sometimes the walk was quite far. Now, just 2.5 blocks from 4th Street, where we lived on 4th Street, to Buchanan School. Taylor School was about 2.5 blocks. But when I lived at Grandma's later on in my life and went to J.B. Young Intermediate School and later on high school, I walked that distance. That was better than a mile, walked each way, which was not unusual. I mean, you walked to school regardless of where you lived. Every kid walked to school. There was no other way. Maybe some were lucky enough to have their dad bring them or take them or somebody in their car. But most of the kids walked. It was standard practice. Of course, the thing is, there were nearly as many automobiles on the street back in those days. It was a much quieter deal all the way around, not nearly as dangerous. And nowadays, I can easily see why you wouldn't risk sending your kid to school if you had to cross Baseline or Dobson or some of these other busy streets. My gosh, it'd scare you to death to think your kid was walking across streets like that. So probably the bus is the only way of doing it.
Did oh, I lost my train of thought. Questions keep going through and then I lose it.
Yeah.
One that I did remember though was when you were talking about German kid coming over when you were in elementary school.
Yeah.
Which would have been during World War I, probably.
No, World War I ended in 1918. I was 6 years old. I was at Buchanan. I started Buchanan School when I was 8.
So he came. Well, then he came after World War I. My question is,
Yeah.
what? You came from a German town,
Yeah.
and obviously Germany was kind of the center of World War I.
Yeah.
What were the Germans and the Germans in America? What were their feelings about what Germany was doing?
Well, their feelings were mixed, the Germans and Americans, and they were somewhat apprehensive too, because there was a lot of Americans that took exception to Germans that lived here, even though they were citizens, because they were German. You know, if you had a German name, people kind of looked down their nose at you, you know. And of course, in those days, a lot of people had a lot of their relatives still in the old country, because back in those days, a great many people were immigrants to America yet.
Right.
And in fact, there were some German stores that were windows busted and things like that, or signs put out and things. They got treated pretty roughly. And it was a sad thing too. And there was same thing happened to the Japs, American Japanese, during Second World War, where we put them in prison camps. That was a bad thing to do.
Well, your name is obviously very German. Did you have any personal experiences or your family with problems like that?
No, not personally. No.
What was so what was the Germans feel? I mean, you said Americans looked down upon the Germans. Well, how did the Germans feel about what Germany was doing? The Germans that were here in America.
Well, the Germans.
Like your family and
Germans were here in America. Were American. They believed in what America was doing and looked down their nose at what Germany had done. I mean, Germany started that war. At least. That's was the popular belief, but actually it was a combination of circumstances there. Before the First World War, there was a lot of strife between various countries there. There are all many more little ones, and they were all fighting amongst themselves. And finally, it just got such a tangle of allegiances over there that something blew it. That's when the guy got killed at Sarajevo. That was Franz Joseph, somebody or other. He was assassinated, and that
Sarajevo.
blew the lid off.
Right.
But
Well, that was my question. I mean, you answered it. I would just, because, I mean, it came to mind because obviously that kid had just moved there immediately after
Yeah,
World War
yeah.
I, and he was from Germany.
well, now the thing is, I don't know whether he came directly from Germany or whether he lived in America prior to coming to our place. He spoke broken German, or broken English, you know. But he may have come from another place. I just know he was German by the way he talked, you know. And later on, I met his family, and they were definitely German. And so he was German to me, you know. And I just figured he just came there, but that isn't necessarily so. I don't know exactly where it came from. He might have been in Indiana or someplace for a number of years first. So it's possible that they missed that being over there in Germany altogether during the war.
Well, since we're on the subject, do you remember, I mean, you were obviously very young during World War I, but do you remember people that came back from World War I? What did people talk about as far as World War I? Talk about what you remember about things related to World War I.
Well, I don't remember anybody coming back and talking about World War I. I suppose you're talking about soldiers that came back. No, I don't remember that. I was either too young or they weren't talking. I don't know which. I never had to serve in the services because, as you know, I was with Lockheed all during the Second World War, so I never was in the services at all in my entire life. So I wouldn't know what the reaction would be other than what I've heard, and what I've heard is that if you are really in the bad situations in war, seeing people killed all around you and everything else, you just don't want to talk about it. You just want to forget it. And I think that might have been the case in a lot of it, because that was the bloody hand-to-hand war that for First World War. Millions of soldiers, and mostly soldiers and sailors. In those days, they spared the cities more or less. They'd fight in the country. It's not like in World War II where they bombed the cities, you know. That was horrible. But where they didn't lose as many civilians, they lost loads and loads of soldiers and sailors in the First World War. So they didn't do a lot of talking about it. It wasn't a pleasant thing. And but as far as what do I remember about the First World War, I lost my father, for one thing, in the flu epidemic. He was at Fort Dodge in Des Moines when the flu epidemic struck, which was a horrible thing. It killed 20 million people over the world. And besides that, why, I remember we had to save some of the craziest things. We had to save tin foil. We had to save peach stones. These are all things to help the war effort, see? Now why those things, now I wonder, why peach stones and why tin foil and what were some of the other stuff? I guess tires, old tires. Well, they did that in the Second World War, but that didn't do any good. I think it was more in an effort to let us suffer, to know that war is a horrible thing. They took our tires and stuff away in the Second World War, and I think that's probably had something to do with the First World War. It would eliminate the use of cars. When your tires blew away, you didn't drive anymore. You suffered. I think that was it, kind of a psychological deal more than anything else, because
Really?
I think so. Because what do they do with those old tires? My gosh, even today with our technical abilities to make the most out of everything, we have billions of tires laying all over this country. No, everybody wondering what are we going to do with them. So back in those days, I don't know what they'd do with the worn out tires.
So when the tires got wore out, you had to turn them in?
Yeah. Well, you couldn't get more. You
Oh, you
couldn't
couldn't
get
get
more. No, you had to turn them in. That's right. You had to turn the tires in. But I remember some of the songs of the First World War. There were some pretty catchy tunes. Keep your head down, Fritzy boy, keep your head down, Fritzy boy. Late last night in the pale moonlight, I saw you, I saw you. Fritzy boy is a German.
Yeah.
Keep your head down, Fritzy boy, keep your head down, Fritzy boy. Something about if I see you, you're going to get shot. You know? There's a Fritzy boy with a German. And there was a lot of tearjerker songs like "How I Miss You" and how I'd like to be home again, and various other ones. There was a lot of good music came out of that war, as was true with the Second World War. We had a lot of very good music come out of there. But I was 6 when the war ended, so there's not an awful lot that I can remember of it.
Well, I cut you off when you were talking about your school after junior high. So now I cut you off there. So, and you mentioned the name of where you went to high school.
Well, I went to...
Continue on your, going back to the vein of school, because that's what
Okay.
you were.
Well, let's see. I
High
told you
school.
about West Intermediate. I went first, since I lived on 4th Street, I went to West Intermediate School, school. And then the house was too small for us. When Charlotte came along, I was 12 years old. And the house was too small, and furthermore, I wasn't getting along with my stepdad too well. And so there was a little bit of friction there, plus the loss of, with the 2-bedroom, you know, it was pretty crowded. So it was decided that I would go up and live with Grandma and Grandpa Franzen up on 13th Street, which I had no objection to either, because I loved it up there. And then, of course, I'd lose all my good friends down in 4th Street, but I still had a gang of, I was lucky that way. I had two gangs of guys on 13th Street and on 4th Street. And so I moved up with Grandma and Grandpa, and when I did, then I had to go to J.B. Young Intermediate School. That's the one I mentioned earlier. I had to walk a mile or more to go to school. And that was a pretty long haul sometimes in winter when it's below 0 weather and the sidewalks aren't cleaned or anything else. It's a job to get there. But anyhow, I can only remember one teacher. She was a tall, thin gal by the name of Mrs. Speetson, and she taught mathematics. Arithmetic is the term I'm trying to say, because mathematics covers the whole shebang. Arithmetic is the fundamental things. And she was a nice gal, and I don't know particularly why I should remember her above any of the others, but I remember others too as far as that goes. But anyhow, I can't think of anything about J.B. Young Intermediate School that rings any bells, except that it was the stage of my life when I started becoming interested in girls. And I remember I used to write notes back and forth to the girls and slip them, you know, across from one table to the counter desk to the other. And I walked down the hall with them and things like that, and had flutters of puppy love going through my veins. And of course at high school that developed to a little greater and finer sense, you know. But it was a good school and I enjoyed it. There was one thing I remember there. We had our seats two together like this, and then there'd be an aisle and two more together like that. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but anyhow, in regard to colored people, didn't I mention something about the... Anyhow, Herman sat next to me. He was black. And we got along real well. And I was crazy about airplanes back in those days. And so I played. Sometimes I was a pilot, he was a co-pilot. Sometimes it was reversed, you know. I don't know how we reversed it and how we decided, but we got along. We fine. And I don't know why that sticks with me, but it does. I guess he's a pretty good pal of mine. And anyhow, then I went to high school.
Well, going on that, you said you were crazy about planes. Did you make model airplanes? Did you collect pictures of planes, or
Well,
was it just an interest?
I got read magazines on airplanes. I wonder if I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. I was 15. Let's see, in 15, I would be, normally I'd be in 10th grade, wouldn't I?
Yeah.
So maybe I'm getting a little, because when I was 15, I really got interested in aircraft, in airplanes. And that was brought about by Charles Lindbergh's flight from New York to Paris nonstop, which was a feat beyond, that's like now going to the moon, you know, because of the aircraft and what the type that they had then. And he did it solo by himself. Anyone else that tried it went with two or three, a whole crew, you know. And